So Mike, you found an interesting article about an uptick in Chinese DDoS services and how they seem to be, I mean, for lack of a better word, the same. Like it seems like they're either using the same code or the same templates, like someone's just sort of stamping them, making them mass production style. So what's up with that? Well, a group, Talos Intelligence, put together a little bit of a write-up on Chinese DDoS services. And they seem to be all using the same code. It's not clear if they're all written by the same guy or maybe there's a couple people who are sharing the code amongst them.
Yeah, I guess you could think of it as like the factory model. There are DDoS as a service sites just being stood up, I think starting this year, like the most ever. So if you're looking to carry out an attack and you want to pay somebody to do it, you have more choices. And if you think back to microeconomics, the fact that there's more of them, more supply, probably means the price is going to go down and there's going to be more of them. So I would just say that what I found interesting about it is we know the DDoS threat is very real. We know the attacks are more frequent, they're larger. I think the last big thing people saw was, IoT devices being used in attacks. That means you can get a lot of devices in a larger size on your attack. Mm-hmm. But just the prevalence of more supply, I think, does tell us these attacks are here to stay. We're going to see DDoS attacks every day going forward, and this just adds to your kind of why you would think that's going to remain the case over time, that people are going to be able to easily sign up for a service, pay to attack someone. And that's going to be kind of the norm going forward. These are out of the U.S., so there's no way we can shut these down, given that they're hosted in China. Mm-hmm. And like you said, it isn't just one site. Evidently, there's just dozens and dozens of sites that kind of look the same, mm-hmm. maybe the same graphics, a lot of the same code. There's some researchers who've made some assumptions about, well, maybe they translated it, like one person was at the center and did the translation from English to Chinese and then supplied everyone else with the information they needed to stand up all of these various sites. But they're all selling the same service, mm-hmm. Take someone down and, pay online.
So this is, it's a growth in the websites themselves. Now, whether or not there's a corresponding growth in the number of bots or DDoSing endpoints out there is kind of a question, right?
That is a question, right?
Because I know we've seen that there are kits you can use to put together the portal for your DDoS service, or at least your personal interface to all the bots that you've got. But whether the bots are a unique population for each case, or maybe there's some sharing being done there, or renting.
To be honest, my first thought was, well, now there's going to be more attacks, more frequent, higher volume. They're already very frequent, very high volume. But it was good that Matt challenged me and said, well, did the supply really grow? The supply of sites grew, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the supply of bots to carry out attacks grew. A good question, is the pool really any larger, mm-hmm. or are they all drawing from the same pool? If you had the time and money, you could probably do a test and ask each of them to carry out an attack and see if there's any contention for resources on the back end of these sites.
It's possible that they may be using a couple of their own unique bots, but then maybe a method like a DNS amplification attack or other reflective services that their endpoints for generating traffic are kind of the same because they're public services that are being used for reflection, and that's speculation, of course. But I really would be interested to see what it looks like under the hood of all these services.
Right, you think of it as taking the attack side to more of a model that we use for legitimate business, where you have specialization and you have different roles that are farmed out. And this looks like the presentation layer. This is the user interface. So you make a good point. Did they really add capacity behind the scenes? Maybe not. Mm-hmm. But it certainly made it easy for people, especially people in China, to quickly pay to carry out an attack. No one really has an index of how much DDoS capacity exists on Earth. It would be interesting if we had started that 10 years ago and could see how much more capacity there is to carry out denial of service attacks. But you get the sense that it's always growing.
What do you think, Jim?
There is supposition that it was different actors was based on the way that each platform handled user payments. But if they are different users, then I don't know, maybe we need to go hire them to DOS each other and keep them out of our way for a while.
All right, well, cool. Thanks for bringing that one to us.
You're welcome.
Back in the day, you had to create your own botnet and then maybe write the front end panel to it, and then you could get it to work in a way that you wanted it to and use it to attack people. DDoS as a service is a little bit scary because all it requires you that you have is some money that you can spend online and a target. So it makes it available to anybody for any reason that they want. So Jim, you had a pretty interesting story here about a very unique espionage campaign. It seems to be targeting Russian-speaking firms. Can you give us a little more detail on it?
This one in particular that caught my attention here was a story that showed up on the Security Affairs blog, but it's actually a report of some research by some guys at Trend Micro. This campaign starts out with an email which contains a .doc file. It's actually an RTF file that is malformed, that exploits a vulnerability in the way that Microsoft Word handles RTF documents. Then it drops an Excel spreadsheet which has malicious JavaScript embedded in it. And this malicious JavaScript in turn executes some PowerShell, which drops a DLL. Then they use the squibbly-do attack to bypass some security checks.
Hang on, Jim. Did you just make that up?
No, I did not.
Are you sure? It sounds like a terribly lazy name. Okay. Squibbly-do? Really? Like, you could have picked anything. Like, I would have loved to have been in the marketing team for this. I feel like there's one guy who's like, Steve, you haven't named anything this month. Like, name something, Steve. You've been doing nothing. He's like, yeah, sure. Squibbly-do.
It drops the DLL, which executes the squibbly-do attack.
Like, what does the logo look like for this? Is it just a squiggle? Maybe I'm giving this too much of a hard time, but it's a ridiculous name.
Which executes some obfuscated JavaScript, which drops another XML file that also uses squibbly-do as its persistence mechanism. This particular chain of events uses squibbly-do twice. First to essentially elevate its privileges using ODBC conf, and then again as its persistence mechanism to allow it to run these scripts embedded in XML files.
It's very complicated.
Doing a lot of work.
It's very complex, and it's not immediately obvious why this is necessary.
It just looked like a whole lot of work, and it looked like more steps than you could really explain. Like, why would you go through all of those steps? Why don't you just hit them with one of those, and you should be able to get into the system and take control?
I guess the big question is, why? Why go to so much trouble? I mean, there's probably easier ways to get your payload on a machine. And why go through so many steps in the middle? I mean, couldn't you jump straight to... And I'm going to say it's squibbly-do. Couldn't you just jump to that, the reg server attack in the middle? What makes this necessary?
Well, I'm not sure what makes it all necessary, but it does seem to be a trend among the malware authors lately to have these multi-layer attacks.
So Jim, is there any way you could avoid detection by using so many different steps?
Well, that may be part of it. I think also part of it is at different points they're taking advantages of different, vulnerabilities to execute their next step to finally embed their malware. And I'd like to get my hands on a sample so I could work through all of it myself. Maybe it's something Stan and I can do sometime in the next couple of weeks.
I'd like to see those results. I mean, it certainly is a unique, as far as I can tell, way of doing things, and maybe there is some advantage of maybe you're able to bypass app whitelisting because nothing you've got here looks particularly like an executable file or something. There might be something. The other thing, this is speculation, but maybe these guys have a whole bunch of working pieces and they just needed it all to work end to end. Maybe they didn't have technical skills on their own to make one working exploit, but they had a bunch of bits of stuff that they knew kind of worked. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. But it was an interesting write-up that, it was showing a pattern that I'd seen elsewhere, so I wanted to mention it here.
Cool. Well, thanks, Jim.
Well, maybe it's harder to maybe to write a signature or to detect it if you're doing a lot of different things as opposed to that one thing you could really focus in on.
If things continue like this, it's definitely a new era for writing these sorts of attacks. I mean, usually you don't have to do too many things, too many gyrations to get your malware on the system, but who knows? Maybe this is the new future.
I think we just need to understand it better to know why they would really go through all that effort.
Let's take a look at this week's internet weather. As you can see by the deltas on this side, not too many major changes, but still worth going through. We keep seeing the same old IoT ports at the top, 23 TCP, 22 TCP. Port 23 TCP is our old friend Telnet, which still is in the top. 22 TCP is SSH, which is usually falling close behind. 1433 is MS SQL, and that's been up towards the top for a while now. Still kind of a mystery as to what it is these folks are looking for, but it seems to be a significant number of probes out there. 445 is up by one spot, and that's our old friend SMB, and that's typically attributed to WannaCry these days, although there's a number of malicious software out there using the same vulnerabilities, and there might even be a small amount of configure in there still, but who knows. I don't see any end to this until people start taking it seriously, patching their old systems, or taking them offline.
I did see chatter about 445 moving up. I actually honestly thought it would have been number one, but it only moved up one spot.
It's still very interesting for a lot of folks, but I think that the vast majority of this is still those IoT devices scanning on 22 and 23 that make up the bulk of the number of probes. For the most sources probing, 23 is also in the top. 445 is also up there as well, which is more in line with what I'd expect. I mean, WannaCry is a worm. There's probably quite a few infected devices out there that still need to be handled at this point. So the number of sources probing as opposed to the number of probes, it kind of makes sense. Port 22 is SSH. 5358, I think we typically attribute to IoT botnets, Hajime in particular. 80 is again in the top. 80 and 11.0, more ICMP error codes for various reasons, and then FTP is a number 8 as well.
So we call it backscatter, right? You're scanning everything and you're getting all these messages back, and that's why you see the
Typically, yeah, when you see these sorts of error messages because there was some sort of major event on the internet or because scanning is failing, coming back with I can't hit the host, I can't hit the port kind of messages. 5358 we've been watching for a while. 5358 continues to be on the rise after being gone for so long, but not too much of a surprise there. This is another of those IoT ports that's been scanned, and we keep seeing that there was a major uptick on around the 6th of this month, but for a while it was completely dead in terms of scanned sources. We're seeing 90 days here. I don't understand what this drop is here. It is very significant, so maybe this is a single portion or the whole botnet just giving up for a bit for some reason, but who knows. But you can see it still trends upwards, so I expect this to continue up for a while. 5358 is registered as Web Services for Devices API, I believe, but typically it's associated with the Hajime botnet. Port 23 TCP is Telnet, and you can see a 90-day window here. We had some more upticks towards the end of last month, start of this one. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the king for a while unless we work on this IoT problem that we've got. But it seems to be up somewhat in the last month or so, a reason unknown.
Right. This is the time of year where we see people going back to school, and we always thought there was just kind of an overall rise in the amount of scanning out there. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many back to school children are installing devices with Telnet running, but there are a lot of things you could stick in a dorm room, right, that could potentially be scannable.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to my college days. Nothing that I could put on the into the plug into the wall or into the Wi-Fi at my college was internet exposed. There may be systems that are maybe a lab system somewhere. Maybe there's like a Unix lab or an IT lab somewhere that gets spun up when students return back, and maybe those have not been patched. I mean, it's a possibility. It may not just be colleges either. You have other grades levels that'll have IT associated with them, so when they come back they'll turn on whatever servers or services that they had exposed. So who knows. 1433 TCP is MS SQL. You're seeing 90 days here, and this is the number of scan flows per hour. The last couple of weeks it was pretty level, and now we've got a couple of spikes here as well, and also an interesting plummet right there. If I go back to that other drop, no, it's not the same time period. Yeah, I was going to say if it really did coincide with it, that would be an interesting indicator that would suggest that maybe that's the same botnet scanning on multiple ports and then for some reason decided to shut itself off for a while, but it doesn't look like that's the case. But yeah, we're up a little bit, maybe about 20 million scan points per hour. So keep an eye on that one. It's been in the top 10 for a couple of weeks, like I said. Taking a 365-day view of the SMB 445 TCP, this continues to trend upward. And this was the spike down here. That was when WannaCry broke out. That was the first indicators right there, and we said, holy cow, that's a really serious thing. But you can see it's completely eclipsed it by now. We're almost getting to twice as many scan SIPs per hour. This is around 20,000 to 25,000. We're coming up towards 40,000 sources per hour.
It is really astounding to see that there was a baseline. We doubled that with these most recent worms that were related to the March patch. And then that's actually gone up, again. I mean, it doubled, which is always significant, but in this case, there was so much scanning already to see it double that it was ridiculous.
This is true. If
almost.
You keep that as your base floor, I mean, yeah, there was a significant amount as well, and that's still tailing off, we think, after Conficker,
right.
Or at least other interested parties who are looking for SMB. But Conficker was the big one for a long time.
Now you've added that much more.
Yeah, you've added that much more. It's incredible. Right. People should really be looking into patching this if they haven't already. They've had 6 months?
4 months?
4 months?
Yeah, more than that.
Yeah, 4 months or so. Yeah. So that's our internet weather for the week.
Lots of activity.
Every week. When you start off and things seem confusing, it's usually that you're missing some crucial details. There's some part of the story that you really haven't been able to dig into and understand yet. And as that goes on, once you've got those pieces, it becomes more obvious. And then you look at it and go, I wonder why I was ever confused in the first place.
The job of the analyst, is to try to figure out what is happening. And sometimes when you look back, you say, oh, well, that's what that was about, and that's what it was called. So I think it's very interesting to explore it when you're still in that kind of discovering what's going on phase. And that's what makes security work challenging and interesting. That's why I'd highly recommend it for young people when I'm able to give them some coaching and direction to consider a career in cybersecurity. You don't get bored. Attackers are putting things together like never before. Every day there's absolutely something new to take a look at and to try to figure out and understand and defend against.